It was a cold Tuesday afternoon when he walked into the piano showroom. The kind of cold that bites through your jacket and makes you wish you had stayed home. But he had been walking past this store for weeks now, always slowing down, always looking through the glass windows at the beautiful instruments inside. Today, something in him said it was time to finally step through that door. The moment he walked in, he felt the warmth hit his face. The showroom was fancy. Really fancy. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. The floors were so polished, he could see his own reflection in them. Soft classical music played from hidden speakers. Everything about this place whispered money and elegance. And then, there was him. His work boots still had dried mud on them from the construction site. His jeans were old and worn, with holes at the knees that came from years of kneeling on concrete. Not from any fashion trend. His flannel shirt had seen better days, faded from countless washes. His hands were rough, covered in calluses from years of hard physical labor. He was a working man in a rich man's world, and everyone in that room noticed it immediately. A saleswoman near the entrance glanced up when the door chimed. She looked at him for maybe half a second, then quickly looked away, suddenly very interested in some papers on her desk. She did not greet him. She did not smile. She simply pretended he was not there. He noticed. He always noticed these things. Another employee, a young man in an expensive suit, was showing a piano to a wealthy-looking couple nearby. When he saw the newcomer, he leaned toward his colleague and whispered something. They both looked over and smirked, like they were sharing a private joke. The joke, of course, was him. A woman in designer clothes was examining a small grand piano in the corner. When she saw him walk past, she pulled her handbag closer to her body, as if she was afraid he might grab it and run. She did not even try to hide what she was doing. To her, he was a threat simply because of how he looked. He kept walking. He had dealt with this his whole life. The looks, the assumptions, the way people decided who he was before he ever opened his mouth. It hurt. But he had learned to keep that hurt buried deep inside where no one could see it. The showroom was filled with pianos of all sizes, uprights along the walls, baby grands in neat rows. But there was one piano that stood apart from all the others. Right in the center of the room, under a spotlight, sat a massive concert grand piano. It was jet black and polished to perfection, gleaming like a mirror under the bright lights. A small sign next to it read $120,000. He stopped in front of it and just stood there, looking at it like a man looks at an old friend he has not seen in many years. The manager of the store had been watching from behind a glass desk near the back. He was a man in his 50s with silver hair combed perfectly to one side, wearing a suit that probably cost more than 3 months of construction wages. His name tag said he was the floor manager. He watched the stranger in the muddy boots stand in front of the most expensive piano in the store, and he decided it was time to intervene. He walked over with a smile that did not reach his eyes. It was the kind of smile people use when they want to seem polite, but really feel the opposite. "Good afternoon, sir," the manager said. His voice was smooth but cold. "Is there something I can help you with today?" The man in the flannel shirt did not look away from the piano. "I see." The manager clasped his hands together. "Well, this particular instrument is a Steinway Concert Grand. Top of the line. It is typically purchased by professional musicians and concert halls." He paused, letting those words hang in the air. "Perhaps you might be more comfortable at the music store down the street? They have a nice selection of keyboards and more accessible options." The man finally turned to look at the manager. His eyes were calm, but there was something deep in them, something the manager could not quite read. "I do not want to buy anything," he said. "I just want to play. If that is allowed." The manager's smile flickered. He looked around the showroom. The wealthy couple had stopped their conversation to watch. The saleswoman at the desk was looking over. Even the woman with the designer handbag had paused to see what would happen next. "Sir, I appreciate your interest, but this is a professional instrument." the manager said, his voice tightening. "It is not really meant for casual testing. These pianos are very delicate, very expensive. I am sure you understand." "One song," the man said. His voice was not demanding, it was not angry, it was simply honest. "That is all I am asking. Just one song." The manager opened his mouth to refuse. He was going to say something about store policy, about liability, about how this was not that kind of establishment. He was going to politely but firmly escort this man out the door before he embarrassed himself, or, worse, embarrassed the store. But before he could speak, a voice came from behind him. "Let him play." The manager turned around. An elderly woman had stepped out from the back office. She was small, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore simple but elegant clothes. Her eyes were sharp and intelligent, the kind of eyes that had seen many things in many years. She was the owner of the store, and everyone knew that when she spoke, her word was final. "Ma'am," the manager started, "I really do not think." "I said let him play." Her voice was soft, but left no room for argument. The manager's jaw tightened. He clearly did not agree, but he was not going to challenge her in front of customers. He stepped aside, gesturing toward the piano bench, with a stiff motion. "Please," he said through a forced smile. "Go ahead." The man looked at the elderly woman. She gave him a small nod, something almost like encouragement. He walked to the piano bench and sat down. His worn boots looked strange against the polished brass pedals. His faded flannel shirt seemed out of place against the gleaming black wood. A few customers exchanged amused glances, already preparing themselves for what they assumed would be an awkward moment. One man in the back actually pulled out his phone and started recording, ready to capture what he thought would be a funny video to share with his friends later. Everyone expected embarrassment. Everyone expected failure. Everyone expected this rough-looking stranger to fumble through a few clumsy notes before giving up and shuffling out the door with his head down. The man in the flannel shirt sat still for a moment. He placed his weathered hands on the keys, feeling the cool ivory beneath his fingertips. He closed his eyes and took a slow, deep breath. The showroom was silent. Everyone was watching. And then he began to play. The first notes floated through the air like a whisper from another world. Soft and delicate, they seemed to hang in the space between heartbeats. Then more notes followed, building slowly, weaving together into something beautiful and haunting. Within seconds, every single person in that room froze. The saleswoman who had ignored him stopped what she was doing, her pen slipping from her fingers. The manager's smirk melted away, replaced by something that looked almost like shock. The woman with the designer handbag lowered it to her side, her mouth falling open. The man with the phone forgot he was recording, too stunned to move, because what they were hearing was not the clumsy playing of an amateur. What they were hearing was mastery. Pure, undeniable, breathtaking mastery. This was no ordinary man, and they had judged him completely wrong. The music that poured from that piano was unlike anything those people had ever heard in their lives. It was not just playing. It was something far deeper than that. It was like watching a man speak a language that went straight to the heart, bypassing words entirely. His fingers moved across the keys with a speed and grace that seemed almost impossible. The piece he played was complex, filled with runs and arpeggios that most pianists spend years trying to master. But he made it look effortless, like breathing, like something as natural as a bird taking flight. The melody started soft, almost fragile, like the first light of morning creeping over the horizon. Then, it began to build, layer upon layer, growing in intensity and emotion. There were moments of such tenderness that people felt their throats tighten. And then there were passages so powerful, so full of raw feeling, that it felt like the walls themselves were trembling. The saleswoman who had pretended not to see him when he walked in was now standing completely still. One hand pressed against her chest. Her eyes were wide, and there was something on her face that looked almost like shame. She had dismissed this man without a second thought. She had written him off as nobody important, and now here he was, creating something so beautiful it made her want to cry. The young employee in the expensive suit, the one who had whispered and smirked, was no longer smiling. He stood frozen near the back of the showroom, his mouth slightly open, watching the stranger's hands dance across the keyboard. He had studied piano for 6 years, as a child. He knew enough to recognize when someone was good. And this man was not just good. This man was extraordinary. The wealthy couple who had been shopping for a piano forgot all about their purchase. They stood arm in arm, listening in complete silence. The wife had tears running down her cheeks. She did not wipe them away. She did not seem to notice them at all. She was lost in the music, transported somewhere far away from this showroom. Somewhere the notes were taking her. And the woman with the designer handbag, the one who had clutched it tighter when he walked past, now held it loosely at her side, completely forgotten. Her face had changed. The suspicion was gone. The judgment was gone. In its place was something that looked like wonder, mixed with a deep and uncomfortable realization of how wrong she had been. The manager stood off to the side, his arms hanging limply at his sides. His carefully practiced smile was nowhere to be seen. Instead, his face showed pure disbelief. He had managed this showroom for 15 years. He had seen professional musicians come in. He had hosted small concerts and events. He thought he knew what real talent looked like. But this was different. This was on another level entirely. The man at the piano played on, his eyes still closed, completely unaware of the effect he was having on everyone around him. Or maybe he was aware, and simply did not care. Maybe in this moment, nothing existed for him except the music. Maybe this was the only place he truly felt free. The piece swelled to its climax, the notes cascading like a waterfall, each one perfectly placed, perfectly timed. His hands moved so fast they were almost a blur, yet every note rang out clear and true. The sound filled every corner of the showroom, bouncing off the polished floors and high ceilings, wrapping around everyone present like a warm embrace. And then, slowly, the music began to soften. The storm passed, and what remained was gentle and bittersweet. The final notes came one by one, each one lingering in the air before fading into silence. The last note hung there for what felt like forever. A single, pure tone that seemed to hold all the beauty and sadness in the world. Then it was gone. The man lifted his hands from the keys and let them rest in his lap. He opened his eyes slowly, as if waking from a dream. For a moment, he just sat there, looking at the piano, his expression unreadable. The showroom was completely silent. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if everyone had forgotten how to breathe. Then, from the back of the room, someone started to clap. It was the elderly woman, the owner. She stood near the entrance to her office, her small hands coming together in slow, deliberate applause. Her eyes were bright with emotion, and there was a smile on her face that spoke of genuine appreciation. Others began to join in. The wealthy couple clapped, the wife still wiping tears from her face. The saleswoman clapped, though she could not quite meet the man's eyes. Even the young employee in the expensive suit brought his hands together, his earlier arrogance completely gone. The applause grew louder, filling the showroom. It was not polite applause, the kind people give out of obligation. This was real. This was earned. The man at the piano looked up, surprised. He seemed almost uncomfortable with the attention, like he had not expected this reaction. He gave a small, humble nod, then started to stand. But before he could move away from the bench, the elderly woman walked toward him. Her steps were slow but purposeful, and the crowd parted to let her through. She stopped a few feet from the piano and looked at him with eyes that seemed to see right through to his soul. "Who are you?" she asked softly. The question was simple, but the way she asked it carried so much more weight. She was not asking for his name. She was asking how someone like him, someone in muddy boots and a faded shirt, could play like that. He looked at her for a long moment. There was a tiredness in his eyes, a weariness that went deeper than physical exhaustion. It was the kind of tired that comes from carrying heavy burdens for too many years. "I am just a guy who plays piano," he said quietly. The elderly woman shook her head slowly. "No," she said. "That is not what I just heard. What I just heard was someone who was trained at the highest level. What I just heard was a gift that very few people in this world possess." He did not respond. He just looked down at his rough, calloused hands, the hands that had just created such incredible beauty. "Please," the woman said gently. "I have owned this store for over 30 years. I have heard many pianists in my time, but I have never heard anyone play quite like you. Will you tell me your story?" The showroom had gone quiet again. Everyone was listening, waiting. The manager had moved closer, his earlier hostility replaced by genuine curiosity. Even the man who had been recording on his phone had lowered it, more interested in hearing the answer than capturing footage. The man in the flannel shirt was silent for a long time. He seemed to be having an internal battle, deciding whether to open up or simply walk away and leave these people with their questions unanswered. Finally, he let out a slow breath. "It was a long time ago," he began, his voice low and rough with emotion. "Another life. Really. I grew up in a rough part of the city. We did not have much. Actually, we did not have anything. My mother worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads." He paused, the memories clearly painful, but she always believed in me. She heard me play on an old broken keyboard at a community center when I was 7 years old. And something in her just knew. She started saving every extra penny she could find. She went without things for herself so she could pay for my lessons. The elderly woman listened intently, her expression soft with compassion. "By the time I was 15, he continued, I had been accepted to one of the best music schools in the country. Full scholarship. They said I was one of the youngest pianists they had ever admitted. People were calling me a prodigy, saying I had a future ahead of me that most musicians only dream about." He stopped. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, it looked like he might not continue. "So what happened?" the elderly woman asked gently. He looked up at her, and in his eyes was a pain so deep it was almost hard to look at. "Life happened," he said. "Life happened, and everything fell apart." The showroom was so quiet you could hear the soft hum of the heating system in the walls. Everyone stood frozen, waiting for him to continue. Even the traffic outside seemed to have gone silent, as if the whole world had paused to listen to this man's story. He sat on the piano bench, his shoulders slightly hunched, staring at the black and white keys in front of him. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. But somehow, it carried to every corner of the room. "I was at that music school for 2 years, he said. 2 of the best years of my life. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who understood me. People who heard music the way I did. Teachers who pushed me to be better every single day. I practiced 8, sometimes 10 hours a day. I did not mind. I loved every second of it." He paused and a small, sad smile crossed his face. "I used to call my mother every Sunday night. She would ask me to play something for her over the phone. It was silly. Really. The sound quality was terrible. But she did not care. She just wanted to hear me play. She would close her eyes and listen. And when I finished, she would always say the same thing." His voice cracked slightly. She would say, "Baby, you are going to change the world with those hands. I always knew it. I always knew you were meant for something special." The elderly woman who owned the store had not moved. Her eyes were fixed on him, full of understanding and patience. She did not rush him. She let him tell the story at his own pace. "I was 17 when I got the call," he continued. It was a Tuesday morning. I remember because I had just finished practicing a piece by Rachmaninoff. My fingers were tired, but I felt good. I felt like I was really getting somewhere. He took a deep breath. It was my aunt on the phone. She told me my mother had collapsed at work. They had taken her to the hospital. By the time I got there, they had already done the tests. The doctors came in with those faces, you know the ones. The faces that tell you bad news is coming before they even open their mouths. A woman in the crowd brought her hand to her mouth. The wealthy wife who had been crying earlier reached for her husband's arm. It was cancer, he said flatly. Stage 4. It had spread everywhere. The doctors said, she might have 6 months if she was lucky. If she was lucky. He laughed bitterly at those words. My mother had worked her whole life. She had sacrificed everything for me. She had given up every comfort, every luxury, every dream she ever had, just so I could have a chance at something better. And now she was dying, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The manager, who just minutes ago had tried to throw this man out of the store, now stood with his head bowed. He could not look up. He could not face the weight of what he was hearing. I left the music school the next day, the man said. I did not even think about it. There was no decision to make. My mother needed me, and I was going to be there for her. That was all that mattered. He lifted his rough hands and looked at them. I got a job at a construction site. It was the only work I could find that paid enough to help with the bills. The medical costs were insane. Even with insurance, there were always more bills, more treatments, more medications. I worked double shifts, sometimes triple. I did whatever it took. He flexed his fingers slowly. These hands that were trained to play concert halls, I used them to carry bricks and mix concrete and swing hammers. At night, they would ache so bad I could barely make a fist. But I did not care. Every dollar I made went to my mother's care. Every single dollar. The elderly woman took a small step closer to him. How long did you care for her? She asked softly. 14 months, he said. The doctors gave her 6 months, but she held on for 14. She was a fighter. My mother. She fought until the very end. His voice broke, and he had to stop for a moment. He pressed his lips together tight, trying to hold back the flood of emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. I was with her when she passed, he finally said. It was early in the morning, just before sunrise. She had been sleeping a lot those last few days, but that morning, she opened her eyes and looked right at me. She was so weak she could barely speak, but she grabbed my hand, and she said, he stopped. The tears he had been fighting finally spilled over, running down his weathered cheeks. She said, promise me you will play again. Promise me you will not give up on your gift. And I held her hand and I told her. I promised. I promised her. I would. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. She smiled at me. This peaceful, beautiful smile. And then, she closed her eyes, and she was gone. The silence in the showroom was absolute. Several people were openly crying now. The saleswoman had tears streaming down her face. Even the young employee in the expensive suit was blinking rapidly, trying to keep his composure. After she died, the bills did not stop, he continued, his voice steadier now but heavy with exhaustion. The medical debt piled up. Tens of thousands of dollars. I had to keep working just to pay it off. I could not go back to school. I could not afford lessons. I could not even afford to rent a practice room. He looked around the showroom at all the beautiful pianos. For 12 years, the only time I touched a piano was in stores like this one. I would walk in, just to feel the keys under my fingers for a few minutes. Most of the time, they would not even let me play. They would take one look at me and decide I did not belong. They would make up excuses or just ask me to leave. His eyes found the manager, who quickly looked away. I stopped trying after a while. It hurt too much. Every time I played, I remembered her. I remembered what I had lost. I remembered the promise I made that I could not keep. So I stopped. The elderly woman reached out and placed her hand gently on his shoulder. But you played today, she said quietly. He nodded slowly. I do not know why, he admitted. Something about today felt different. I walked past this store like I have done 100 times before. But today, my feet just carried me inside. And when I saw that piano sitting there under the lights, it was like something inside me woke up. Something I thought was dead. He looked at the elderly woman. And for the first time, there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Something that looked almost like hope. When I sat down at that bench, I did not know if I could still play. It has been so long. My hands are not what they used to be. But when I touched those keys, he trailed off, searching for the right words. It was like coming home, he finally said. After being lost for so many years, it was like finally coming home. The elderly woman smiled at him, her eyes warm with compassion and something else. Something that looked like the beginning of a plan. What is your name? She asked. He told her. She nodded slowly, as if confirming something to herself. I think, she said carefully, that your mother would be very proud of what you did today. And I think she would want you to know that it is not too late. It is never too late to keep a promise. He looked at her, confused. What do you mean? The elderly woman glanced toward her office, then back at him. Wait here, she said. There is someone I need to call. And before he could respond, she turned and walked away, leaving him sitting at the piano, surrounded by strangers who no longer felt like strangers, wondering what could possibly happen next. He sat at the piano bench, not sure what to do with himself. The elderly woman had disappeared into her office, and the door had closed behind her with a soft click. Through the frosted glass, he could see her silhouette moving around, picking up a phone, pacing back and forth as she talked. The other people in the showroom slowly began to move again, like they were waking up from a spell. But nobody left. Nobody went back to browsing pianos or checking price tags. They just stood there, glancing at him, whispering to each other, waiting to see what would happen next. The wealthy couple approached him first. The husband cleared his throat awkwardly, not quite sure what to say. That was incredible, he finally managed. I have never heard anything like it. His wife nodded, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Your mother sounds like she was an amazing woman, she said softly. She must have loved you so much. He looked up at them and gave a small nod. She was everything to me, he said simply. The couple exchanged a glance, and then the husband reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. I know this might seem strange, he said, but I own a small event company. We organize corporate functions, charity galas, that sort of thing. If you ever want to perform, even just background music at events, please give me a call. I would be honored to have you. He took the card, surprised. He looked at it for a moment, then back at the couple. Thank you, he said. That means more than you know. The couple smiled and stepped back, giving him space. Next came the saleswoman, the one who had ignored him when he first walked in. She approached slowly, her eyes red from crying, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. I owe you an apology, she said quietly. When you came in, I made assumptions about you. I judged you, without knowing anything about you. That was wrong, and I am sorry. He looked at her for a long moment. There was no anger in his eyes, no resentment, just a tired understanding. You are not the first, he said. And you probably will not be the last. But thank you for saying that. Most people never do. She nodded, blinking back fresh tears, and walked away. Even the young employee in the expensive suit made his way over. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. I was a jerk, he admitted bluntly. I whispered about you. I made fun of you in my head, and the whole time, you could play circles around anyone I have ever met." The man in the flannel shirt almost smiled. "It is not about being better than anyone else," he said. "It is about what the music means to you. If you love it, keep playing. That is all that matters." The young employee nodded slowly, like he was really hearing those words for the first time. About 20 minutes passed. People talked quietly among themselves. A few new customers came in, confused by the strange atmosphere, but quickly caught up by the others on what had happened. The story spread through whispers and excited murmurs. A man in work clothes had come in, played like a master, and shared a story that broke everyone's hearts. Finally, the office door opened. The elderly woman stepped out, and there was a look on her face that was hard to read. It was somewhere between satisfaction and excitement, with a hint of nervousness mixed in. She walked straight to him, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. "I just got off the phone with an old friend of mine," she said. "He is the director of the city's Philharmonic Orchestra. They are one of the most respected orchestras in the region, and they are holding auditions next week for a guest soloist position." He stared at her, not quite processing what she was saying. "It is a paid position," she continued. "The soloist performs with the orchestra for a series of concerts over several months. It is a serious opportunity. The kind that could open doors you thought were closed forever." He shook his head slowly. "I appreciate what you are trying to do," he said. "But I cannot audition for something like that. I have not performed in over a decade. I do not have any recordings or a resume. I do not even have proper clothes for an audition." The elderly woman held up her hand to stop him. "I told my friend everything," she said. "I told him what I heard today, and I told him your story. He trusts my judgment. He has agreed to give you a private audition, no resume required. All you need to do is show up and play." He opened his mouth to protest again, but she cut him off. "As for the clothes," she said, "I have a nephew about your size. He has a closet full of suits he never wears. I will have one delivered to you before the audition." He was speechless. He looked around the room at all these strangers who were watching with hopeful expressions, willing him to say yes. "Why are you doing this?" he asked finally. "You do not know me." The elderly woman smiled warmly. "Because I have been in this business for over 30 years, she said. "I have heard hundreds of pianists, maybe thousands. Some were good. Some were very good. But what I heard from you today was something rare. Something that only comes along once in a lifetime." She paused, her eyes bright with conviction. "Talent like yours does not belong in construction sites and empty showrooms. It belongs on stages, in concert halls, where the whole world can hear it. Your mother knew that. She sacrificed everything because she knew what you were capable of. Do not let her sacrifice be for nothing." Those words hit him like a wave. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had carried bricks and held his dying mother, the same hands that had just made a piano sing after 12 years of silence. "I made her a promise," he said quietly. "I promised her I would play again. I promised her I would not give up." "Then keep your promise," the elderly woman said gently. "This is your chance." He was quiet for a long time. The whole showroom held its breath. Finally, he looked up at her. "Okay," he said. "I will do it." A wave of applause and cheers erupted through the store. People clapped and smiled. Strangers united by this moment they had all witnessed together. But the elderly woman was not finished. She walked over to the beautiful Steinway grand piano, the one that cost $120,000, the one he had played just an hour ago. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small sign. It said "Sold" in elegant red letters. She placed it carefully on top of the piano. He watched her, confused. "What are you doing?" She turned back to him with a mischievous smile. "This piano is now on loan to you," she said, "until the day you can afford to buy one of your own." And something tells me that day is coming sooner than you think." His eyes went wide. He tried to speak, but the words would not come. His throat tightened. And for the first time, in as long as he could remember, tears of something other than sadness rolled down his face. Tears of hope. Tears of gratitude. Tears of a man who had been lost in the dark for so long and was finally seeing a glimpse of light. He stood up from the bench and did something he rarely did with strangers. He hugged her. The elderly woman hugged him back, patting his shoulder gently. "Go home and rest," she whispered. "You have a big week ahead of you. And I have a feeling your mother is watching. And she is very, very proud." He pulled back, wiped his eyes, and nodded. As he walked toward the door, every person in that showroom watched him go. The man who had walked in as a nobody was walking out as something else entirely. A man with a second chance. A man who was about to find out just how much his life was about to change. The week that followed felt like a dream he was afraid to wake up from. The piano arrived at his small apartment 2 days later. It barely fit through the door, and the delivery men had to remove the legs just to get it inside. But when they finally set it up in his tiny living room, taking up almost half the space, he just stood there staring at it for nearly an hour. A Steinway grand piano. In his home. It did not seem real. That night, he played for the first time in years without anyone watching. He played until his fingers ached and his eyes burned with tears. He played songs he had learned as a child, pieces he had mastered at music school, and melodies that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him that he had forgotten existed. His neighbors probably heard every note through the thin walls. But not a single one complained. In fact, the next morning, he found a handwritten note slipped under his door. It said, "That was beautiful." The suit arrived the day before the audition. It was dark, navy blue, perfectly tailored, and fit him like it had been made just for him. There was a note pinned to the jacket from the elderly woman. "You already have everything you need inside you. This is just the wrapping paper. Go show them who you are. R." He read those words at least a dozen times. The morning of the audition, he woke up before sunrise. He could not sleep anyway. His stomach was in knots, and his hands were shaking slightly as he buttoned up the crisp white shirt that came with the suit. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror. The man staring back at him looked different. The same weathered face, the same tired eyes. But there was something else there now. A spark that had been missing for a very long time. He took a deep breath and spoke to his reflection. "This is for you, Mama. Everything I do today is for you." The concert hall was magnificent. It was one of the oldest and most beautiful venues in the city, with tall marble columns, velvet seats, and a ceiling painted with angels and clouds. He had walked past this building countless times over the years, never imagining he would one day step inside. The audition was private, just as the elderly woman had promised. The orchestra director met him in the lobby. He was a tall man, with gray hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He shook his hand firmly and studied him with genuine curiosity. "So you are the one who made my old friend cry over the phone," the director said with a slight smile. "She has not stopped talking about you all week. I have to admit, she got my attention." He did not know what to say, so he simply nodded. "Well then," the director said, gesturing toward the stage. "Let us see what you can do." Walking onto that stage felt like stepping into another world. The auditorium was empty except for the director, who sat alone in the front row with a notepad on his lap. The silence was enormous, pressing in from all sides. And there, in the center of the stage, sat a concert grand piano. Bigger and more beautiful than any instrument he had ever played. He walked toward it slowly, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. When he reached the bench, he paused for a moment, running his fingers along the smooth wood. Then he sat down. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. For a moment, he was not in a concert hall. He was back in his childhood apartment, sitting at that old broken keyboard while his mother watched from the kitchen doorway, smiling that proud smile of hers. He placed his hands on the keys, and he began to play. The music that filled that empty hall was unlike anything he had ever produced before. It was everything he had been holding inside for 12 years. Every moment of grief, every day of exhaustion, every night he had spent missing his mother and wondering if he would ever feel whole again. But there was something else in the music too. Hope, gratitude, the joy of finally being exactly where he was meant to be. He played for nearly 20 minutes without stopping. He moved through pieces by the great composers, transitioning seamlessly from one to the next. His fingers flew across the keys with a speed and precision that seemed impossible for hands that had spent years doing manual labor. When the final note faded into silence, he sat still for a long moment, his hands resting gently on the keys. Then he heard something he did not expect. Applause. He opened his eyes and looked up. The director was standing, clapping slowly but with obvious emotion. His notepad lay forgotten on the seat beside him. "In 40 years, the director said, his voice thick, "I have never heard anyone play like that. Not once." He walked toward the stage, still clapping. "The position is yours," he said, "if you want it." 1 month later, the concert hall was full. Every seat was taken. People stood in the aisles and crowded near the doors. The story had spread far and wide by then. News stations had picked it up. Newspapers had written about it. The video from the piano showroom, the one that customer had recorded on his phone, had been viewed millions of times online. Everyone wanted to see the construction worker who played like a master. The man who had given up everything for his mother and was finally getting his second chance. Backstage, he stood alone in a small dressing room, wearing a perfectly fitted black tuxedo. He looked at himself in the mirror, barely recognizing the man staring back. There was a soft knock on the door. He opened it to find the elderly woman from the piano store, dressed in an elegant silver gown. "How are you feeling?" she asked gently. He let out a nervous laugh. "Terrified," he admitted. She smiled and reached out to straighten his bow tie. "Good," she said. "That means you care. Now go out there and make your mother proud." He nodded, blinking back the emotion rising in his chest. "Thank you," he said, "for everything. You changed my life." She shook her head. "No. You changed your own life. I just opened a door. You are the one who walked through it." The stage manager appeared in the hallway. 2 minutes, she said. He took a deep breath and walked toward the stage entrance. The elderly woman gave his arm one final squeeze before letting go. As he stepped into the wings, he could hear the murmur of the crowd beyond the curtain. Thousands of people waiting to hear him play. The lights dimmed. The murmur faded to silence. And then, his name was announced. He walked out onto the stage. The applause hit him like a wave. People were already on their feet, cheering, before he had even played a single note. He saw the elderly woman in the front row, beaming up at him. Beside her sat the wealthy couple from the showroom, the saleswoman who had apologized, and dozens of others who had heard his story and wanted to witness this moment. He sat down at the piano and looked out at the sea of faces. Then he closed his eyes. He thought of his mother, her warm smile, her gentle hands, her voice telling him he was meant for something special. "This is for you, Mama," he whispered. And then he played. The music soared through the hall like something alive, filling every corner, touching every heart. People laughed and cried and held each other as the notes washed over them. When the final chord rang out, there was a moment of perfect stillness. Then the audience erupted. The standing ovation lasted for nearly 10 minutes. People cheered and clapped and wiped tears from their eyes. They had come to hear a piano performance, but what they had witnessed was something far greater. They had witnessed a man who refused to let his dreams die, a man who kept a promise to his mother, a man who proved that no matter how far you fall, it is never too late to rise again. And somewhere, beyond the lights and the applause and the roar of the crowd, he knew she was watching, and he knew she was proud.